Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. Today we have a special show lined up. Laurence Kotlikoff, famed author and professor of economics at Boston University, will be joining us shortly. Right now on the line, Rory and I are going to hash out some big news items. Rory, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, Sean?
Yeah, I'm doing well too. Hey, did you see this article Zero Hedge ran with on Saturday called "The Financial Times Goes There"? Quote, "Demand physical gold," they're saying, as one day the paper price manipulation will end, quote, "catastrophically," end quote. I'll tell you what, man, the dominoes are starting to fall, aren't they?
Well, when you have someone who is the mouthpiece of the powers that be, like the Financial Times, that has a headline like that, come on. I mean, it's something's going on. If you don't have ounces, then it's not going to matter.
And they're saying, quote, "One day the ties that bind this pixelated gold may break with potentially catastrophic results." You know, we saw Boffin talk about the manipulation of precious metals being more severe than even LIBOR manipulation. Then the next day we saw Deutsche Bank say that they're going to get out of the gold price fix that happens twice daily. This thing is really starting to blow up. You and I have talked about it for a very long time that, people would be surprised at how quickly the paper Ponzi unravels. And I think it's starting to happen. It's happening maybe in slow motion, but it's really starting to pick up.
As far as Deutsche Bank dropping out, I don't know if that's positive yet or not. I mean, that seems like just a case of musical chairs. Just hand it off to the next Rothschild agent and say, "There you go, your turn. You play."
Yeah, the twice daily price fix will continue. I mean, I don't think that just because Deutsche Bank is bowing out under pressure from German regulators, that's going to change much of anything. But the good news is the world is waking up. Everybody knows. I mean, nation states are waking up to what's going on, and China's hoarding as much gold as they can possibly hoard. My kids just brought in a new critter. What is this, you guys? It's a what? A dwarf hamster? Oh, he's adorable. All right, so now let me get a total running tally. You guys, wait. These are my kids. I've got I won't name their names, but they're pretty sweet kids. So we have what? We have a dog. We have a cat. We have five lizards, two rabbits. What kind of rabbits are they? What are they? Holland lops, and now
Holland lobs.
and now what are these? Two dwarf hamsters. Wow.
It's a zoo.
Yeah, we have a
It's
zoo.
the Sean Zoo.
This is breaking news for all the friends of SGT Report. If you ever are in the area, we'll let you come to our zoo for free. Well,
Oh my goodness.
let's turn our attention back to the economic news. As you know, Rory, the economy added 74,000 jobs in December, and the jobless rate is at 6.7%, so all is well. We know it's tough out there for so many people, and it's really tough in a way that the mainstream media, of course, refuses to report on. Do you want to just talk briefly about any developments you're seeing before we throw it over to Laurence Kotlikoff?
Well, it's not necessarily new developments, but in the COMEX, speaking of the COMEX has 370,000 ounces of gold
Oh, that's right. J.P. Morgan just lost the most gold.
in one day.
SRS Rocco just reported the other day that J.P. Morgan lost more gold in one day than they've ever lost. I believe it was, how many ounces was that, Rory?
I can't remember exactly, but I do know that the COMEX numbers, 370,000 in registered inventory that's available to be bought by under contract. And still, here we are in the last week of January, and 125,000 ounces are still outstanding from the December contract.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you subtract 125,000 from 370,000, that leaves you 245,000. So let's just say that they have less than 250,000 ounces of gold at the COMEX, and we have the second largest delivery month staring us in the face called February.
No, you're right. Getting back to that SRS Rocco report, he says a run on physical, record one-day withdrawal of gold from J.P. Morgan, and that number, exactly 10 metric tons, were withdrawn from the eligible category in one day. In one day, J.P. Morgan... In one day, J.P. Morgan lost 22% of its total gold stocks at the COMEX. So, hey, guess what? This sea change we've been describing and this fall of the dominoes we've been describing, it's not hyperbole, it's not rhetoric. It's truly, truly happening. And the state of the financial affairs in this nation is more dire than it's ever been in the history of our country. And I want to welcome to the program right now Laurence Kotlikoff. Laurence is an author and a professor of economics at Boston University. He's written books like The Clash of Generations, Saving Ourselves, Our Kids, and Our Economy. And just a few of his recent articles that I think are pertinent are, oh, by the way, our government is totally broke. Is hyperinflation just around the corner? And one called The U.S. Fiscal Cliff. Mr. Kotlikoff is also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a former senior economist on President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Mr. Kotlikoff, too bad you're not a very prolific guy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we really do appreciate you taking the time today. The folks at Boston University must love you because I can only count maybe a handful, less than a handful, maybe 3 economists that I know by name, and you're one of them. How have you accomplished this prolific public persona?
One thing is to not focus too narrowly on any one topic in economics because there's a lot of exciting things to do. So I view myself more like a utility infielder who can play a lot of positions, not necessarily as well as somebody who specializes full time in one thing. And then the other thing is having some good English teachers back in high school who taught me how to write, and trying just to, over the years, practicing writing to the public in a way that conveys the actual economics, but it's not beyond anybody's ability to get. Economics does not have to be complicated if it's taught well. It's really just pretty much common sense.
You know, I don't know that you know this, but I did a video in 2010, December of 2010, called Why Silver, Why Now? And I quoted you, and the quote was this: the net actual national debt is $202 trillion. The United States is bankrupt. And you wrote an article in 2013 called Is Hyperinflation Just Around the Corner? Sir, if I quoted you in 2010 as saying the net actual national debt is $202 trillion, we're now 3 years past that time of that video and that quote. How much more have things deteriorated since then, and is any of this fixable, or does the system just need to break and be reset?
Well, the number of 202 trillion that I wrote about then and have been writing about for years is what's called the fiscal gap. The fiscal gap puts everything on the books. Our government has specialized over the decades, starting really with President Eisenhower and that administration, to put liabilities off the books. Yeah. So what we do is we take taxes from young people, we call them whatever, payroll taxes or income taxes, whatever, and then we promise them services in the future or transfer payments like Social Security benefits when they're older, or Medicare benefits or Medicaid benefits, or food stamps, or defense of the country. All these things are implicit promises, but they're real obligations of the government, and they're kept off the books. So what economics tells us is that what's on the books, what the official debt is reported to be, is entirely arbitrary. It's a function, an implication of our choice of words. If we call some money that we take from young people borrowing as opposed to taxes, but we connect that with a promise to future either principal plus interest or future transfer payments like Social Security benefits. It's economically speaking, it's the same thing, but if we use one set of words called borrowing, this becomes an official liability. If we use a different set of words, it becomes an unofficial liability. But in economic terms, it's no different because the unofficial liabilities, I think, in many ways are much more real in the sense of much higher probability of being paid off than the official ones. The official liabilities, where the government says it have the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, these are our official treasury bills and bonds that can be eliminated pretty quickly in real terms by just running inflation. And the government's on its way to do that in spades, I think. But anyway, the fiscal gap says let's look at all the expenditure commitments, no matter what they're called, whether they're called paying back principal plus interest on government debt, whether they're called paying for the president's lunch, whether they're called food stamp payments or defense expenditures. Let's take all those future expenditures as projected by the government and the Congressional Budget Office does that, and then form the value in the present of those expenditures, and compare that with the present value of all the future taxes. And that the difference is the fiscal gap. Our current fiscal gap is $205 trillion. Now that's a little bit bigger than 202 trillion, which was the number I came up with about 2002. It got to be about 222 trillion, but then we had the sequestration and the change in the tax law that occurred in the last year or so, and actually really in the last few months, and that's done some good. But the fiscal gap is still absolutely enormous. It's like we have this very big tumor in our bodies. It's slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we watch it grow for a few years, and then we decide to operate and we take away about a tenth of it and leave the rest of it to continue growing. That's what we've got. We've got a country that's entirely broke, fiscally broke. It's in much worse shape than Detroit. It's probably in the worst shape, from what I can tell, it's in the worst shape of any developed world country. The fiscal gap in Russia, scaled by its economy, is smaller. To give you an example, it's smaller, I believe, in Greece. In Italy, it's much smaller. The fiscal gap in the U.S. is 10% of GDP on an ongoing basis, 10.3% of GDP. That would require, coming up with 10.3% of GDP every year to come up with, in present value, $205 trillion, would require, if we did it through tax hikes, an immediate and permanent 57% hike in all taxes, all federal taxes, corporate personal income tax, FICA taxes, they all have to go up, state and gift taxes by 57%. Or we could cut every single dollar of expenditure by about 35%. And that means going to my 94-year-old mom and cutting her Social Security benefits by about a third, saying, "Too bad, Mom. Your Medicare benefits cut by a third. Yeah. All the income you're getting from the government cut by a third." So we are in terrible shape. They're worse than Detroit, and we're not recognizing it because we have the people that are doing the accounting are engaged in fallacious accounting. We've got the Office of Management and Budget lying about the government's finances. We've got the Congressional Budget Office hiding these long-run projections to the extent possible. We've got the General Accountability Office ignoring them. And meanwhile, in other countries around the world, they're doing this fiscal gap accounting on a routine basis. The European Union just did this for all its members in a study in 2012. One government after another in Europe is doing this fiscal gap accounting routinely. We have a bill now in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill. It was just introduced by Senator Thune from South Dakota and Senator Kaine from Virginia. Thune is a Republican, Kaine's a Democrat. It's called the Inform Act. And I hope that everybody will go to theinformact.org, INFORM, theinformact.org. This is a bill that has been endorsed by over 1,000 economists, including 15 Nobel Prize winners. Getting 15 Nobel Prize winners to endorse anything is impossible. This has never been done before. And these are economists who lean to the left, who lean to the right. Some of these people lean far to the left and far to the right. They're both there. They're all there on the same page in terms of endorsing this act. And this act requires the CBO, OMB, and GAO to do fiscal gap accounting on a routine basis. Because rather than having just me put these numbers out and talking to you on the air about them and occasionally writing about them and occasionally somebody in the press pays some attention, let's have the federal government, do proper economic accounting, and then we start to recognize that we've set up a complete disaster for our children because we are on the course of dumping all these liabilities into the laps of our kids. And I wrote about this in a book called The Clash of Generations with Scott Burns. This is I've been writing about this problem for decades. We wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Coming Generational Storm. A couple years ago, we wrote The Clash of Generations.
The subtitle to that was Saving Ourselves, Our Kids, and Our Economy, which I like. As a father of 4 children, I would like to hand these kids a country that they could be proud of and a future that would actually give them something to live for, but we truly are robbing the future generations for our current benefit.
And it's not just through this. I mean, it's through the way we're educating and not educating our kids, through the way we are destroying the climate or changing the climate to endanger the planet. I don't think there's any disagreement by the top scientists that we are perilously close to really destroying the economy in a way that's irreversible. I mean, the climate and the planet.
But let me ask you about that, though, because that's such a controversial issue in that those of us who are awake don't believe that the powers that be can fix whatever's going on with the climate by any of us paying more taxes or by shutting down coal-powered plants. It kind of gets into this idea of austerity. You had mentioned earlier in the interview here that a 1/3 cut in Social Security benefits and all of these drastic cuts would be necessary to rein in this out-of-control fiscal beast. That's really austerity, and it's not going to work, is it? Austerity will not work. It'll just be more for the Pentagon, more for the big banks, less for the people. That's the European model, and I don't think you're advocating that, are you?
Well, look, I don't know what austerity means exactly, or the opposite. I know that if we're producing coal and it's going into the atmosphere and it's warming the planet, we have to stop producing coal. So we need to have a tax on carbon, a pretty high tax that stops the production of coal. Otherwise, we will be dead.
But
You
can finish. I just want to press you on that because we know the Chinese aren't going to abide by those same rules. If you look at the smog issues and the pollution issues and all our outsourcing of all our manufacturing to China, they're not going to play along.
Let me answer. If I were president, I would put on a carbon tax, and I would tell any country that wants to export to the U.S. that we're going to put on a tax on your imports from you that are proportional to the damage that production of those imports cause to the planet. So we will tax the dirty energy content of your imports. This will get China's attention, and they will change their behavior. And because everybody in the world depends to a large extent on the U.S., we have a lot of means to get serious about saving the planet and getting everybody together with us to do that. And we certainly have allies in Europe and Japan to help enforce a global carbon tax. So this can be done. This is a matter of will and a matter of straight talk. As for austerity, well, look, if you're Detroit and you're going bankrupt and you can't pay your firemen and policemen because you've engaged in fallacious, really criminal accounting for decades, which is really no different from what Uncle Sam has been doing. You finally look at your fiscal gap in Detroit and you realize you're broke. Well, you have to declare bankruptcy and you have to do some adjustments. And that's what has to happen here. Now, you want to call that austerity or you want to call it facing reality? I don't care. But it has to be done. It doesn't mean the country has to go, that everybody's going to be unemployed as a result of this. We have had, an economy, we've faced much tougher problems in the past, like World War II, where we had to extract huge amounts of resources from the economy to deal with building up the military and defeating our enemies. And we did not, the economy, had full employment, and after the war, it grew. So the idea that you have to spend money to make when you're broke, that you need to spend money to heal yourself, or that when you're broke, you need to cut taxes to nothing in order to get more taxes. This is economics voodoo. President Bush the First, who was a sensible person, unlike his son, called this voodoo economics. So we have crazy voodoo doctors on the left, like Paul Krugman. We have voodoo doctors on the right, like Art Laffer. Krugman thinks every dollar we spend, government can just print money out the wazoo, spend it, and nothing bad will ever happen. And we should, and we're actually going to be able to pay for that extra spending without having any inflation, or we should just borrow the money and spend it, and our kids won't face any higher taxes to cover the debt. This is not the predictions of basic economics, nor is the prediction that you can cut taxes to nothing and expect to get more tax revenue, which is Art Laffer, people on the right, the supply siders' point of view. The vast majority of economists who actually do their homework on these things, who actually study this stuff carefully and reasonable long-term dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium life cycle models, that's the language for the models that we work on. And these things are being studied and simulated and run all around the world. You get a very clear message. If you run policies like this, that we've been running in our country for 6 decades, you run your economy down the tubes. If you start reversing the policies, get your fiscal house in order, gradually you'll start growing again. You'll start saving again. You'll start investing again. I don't know if you guys know this, but our national saving rate last year was only 2%. That's national saving as a share of national income, 2%. You can look it up in the national income accounts. You'd think a reporter might actually do a little, adding and subtracting and dividing and find out the national saving rate is only 2%. It was 15% back in 1950. It's gradually gone down from 15% to 2% with a bunch of ups and downs, but a long run serious decline in national saving. And the reason for this is that we've been taking from young people through our fiscal system and giving to old people. And when the old people get these resources in the form of Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits and Medicaid benefits, they consume them. So the consumption of the elderly has gone up. The young people have been placated with the knowledge that they'll be able to expropriate their kids when they get their chance when they're older, and they haven't reduced their consumption. So in total, national consumption's gone up, national savings gone down, and because what we save is what's needed to invest, if we don't save, we don't invest. So our national investment rate right now, our net national investment rate domestic investment rate is only 4%. It was also 15% in 1950. So we've driven our saving and investment down the tubes. And if you don't invest much, you don't grow, you don't have workers enjoying the additional tools, capital, physical plant and equipment that would come with additional investment. So their real wages don't rise as rapidly. And you know that real wages in the country on a take-home basis are actually lower today than they were in 1965.
That's what I was just going to mention. As you mentioned that falling savings rate, I was going to jump in and say it seems to be commensurate with the real income rate falling as steadily as it has decade over decade over decade, which I would blame on the policies of the Federal Reserve and the government in tandem working together with this fiat debt-based Ponzi scheme that they have running. But
yeah, and it sounds like somebody might be listening who's left of center. Or even right, maybe your listeners are right of center. It doesn't matter what part, where they are, what planet they're on, but where they're coming from. But there are ways we can fix the country without absolutely pulling out the rug from anybody. We have to have a forced saving system because people need to come into retirement with something to live on because we are all altruistic towards each other, especially when we're older.
right.
And we don't want to free ride on each other and say, look, I won't save because my brother across the street will take care of me. And he says the same thing and nobody saves and therefore everybody ends up broke in old age. That doesn't work for us. So we need to force people to save, but we don't need to do it through a Social Security system that's 32% underfinanced on its own books. In Table 4B6 of the Social Security Trustees Report, you can see it, 32% underfinanced. We're at a $1.7 trillion fiscal gap deficit last year. Its fiscal gap grew by 1.7 trillion. That's compared to an official debt deficit this year of about 600 billion. So we can have a basic health insurance plan for every American and still have private provision by doctors and hospitals that doesn't drive the country broke, that stays at a cost around 10% of GDP rather than having the thing explode to 20 or 30% of GDP, which is what's projected by the CBO. We can have a tax system that's straightforward. There's the common sense tax proposal that I have at thecommonsensetax.org, which involves repositioning the corporate income tax so that shareholders pay it at the personal level. We can have a banking system that doesn't fail, that has transparency and no leverage. That's a mutual fund banking system I propose called limited purpose banking. And there's a book called Jimmy Stewart is Dead, which anybody can read. It's written for the public. And it's been endorsed by a large number of Nobel Prize winners and George Shultz and top economists who haven't won the Nobel Prize. So we can have a honest accounting of our fiscal gap. That's been endorsed by 1,000 economists, more than 1,000 of the top economists, and not the top economists from all walks of life, mostly academics, and 15 Nobel Prize winners, probably soon to be 18 Nobel Prize winners. Unheard of to have the entire economics profession, with the absence, maybe exception of a Paul Krugman and an Art Laffer, endorsing a piece of legislation that says enough with this lying about our fiscal position. This is the entire economics profession doing the equivalent of sending President Roosevelt a letter in 1938 that the Germans are about to develop the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
If you have a Democratic senator or any contact with anybody in the White House, what we need is to get the Democrats on board. The Republicans will come on board on this, but the Democrats have to endorse this bill. Now, the majority of the people, of the economists, are left of center who have endorsed this bill. Okay, I know the economists who've signed up, and there are, I think, more Democrats than Republicans who've endorsed this piece of legislation. So there's an action plan here, which is let's get the truth out to begin with, and then let's figure out how to fix things in a reasonable way. And I have another website called thepurpleplans.org, thepurpleplans.org, where you see simple postcard-length proposals to fix Social Security, the healthcare system, the tax system, the energy problems, how to do a carbon tax. And there are solutions that we economists have come up with that are very simple.
Let me jump in. I think what you're describing here is a sea change, because the whole world knows that this fiscal system, certainly the way that this government runs the books, is a fraud, and it's been exposed. Before I lose you, I would really like to talk about the real rate of unemployment. This government, with its fraudulent accounting, claims that the unemployment rate is below 7%. I think the real unemployment rate may be north of 30%. I would like your opinion on that. But you've mentioned carbon taxes again several times in this interview, and I just don't agree that carbon taxes are going to be a way to fix the environment. We can't trust the banks. We can't trust the governments. I don't understand how a carbon tax given to these same people is going to fix anything that's wrong with the climate. Well, friends, I'm going to jump in here, and I want to thank you for listening to part 1 of our interview with Laurence Kotlikoff. I invite you to tune in for part 2, which we'll be posting shortly, in which we talk about hyperinflation, we debate Lawrence's call for a carbon tax, and we talk about the employment participation rates, the real rate of unemployment in our nation. Thank you for joining us, and do check out sgtreport.com for all the daily news and information that's real, as well as thelibertymill.com, real news 24/7. Thank you for tuning in. We very much appreciate it.